The time is 9:04 a.m. We're on the record. This is the 30B6 deposition of Tina Axelrad for the case of Friends of Denver Parks, Inc. et al. Versus City and County of Denver et al. Case number 2013-CB032444 and the District Court, Denver County, State of Colorado. Today is March 18th, 2014. We are located at 1660 South Albion Street, Suite 1100, Denver, Colorado. The court reporter is Deanna Basinger. The videographer is JRN CLVS. The attorneys will identify themselves, beginning with the attorney on my left and the deponent's right.
My name is John Case. I represent the plaintiffs.
Also with you?
With me is Christopher Franceschi.
David Broadwell, I represent the City and County of Denver.
Jerome D. Herrera, representing Denver Public Schools.
Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of law?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Could you please state your full name?
Tina Axelrad.
And what's your residence address, please?
Residence is 6820 East Iliff Avenue, Denver, Colorado 80224.
And your date of birth?
3/29/1963.
You work for the City of Denver?
I do.
In what capacity?
I'm a principal city planner with the city's Community Planning and Development Department.
How long have you worked for the City and County of Denver?
About 7.5 years.
And what previous titles did you hold while you worked for the city?
I've always held the same title.
Could you tell us your education background, please?
I have a Master's of Urban Planning and a law degree from New York University and a BA in Economics from Connecticut College.
Did you bring some information with you today?
I did.
May I see it, please?
A copy of Susan Barngelt's affidavit, copy of the OSA zone district from the Denver zoning code, two different sections. One is section Article 9, Division 9.3, and the other is Article 11, Division 11.12, definitions in 11.12.3.3.
May I see that last one, please? Thank you.
I have just some scribbled notes and a couple of examples of zone map amendments in the last 4 years concerning properties that were zoned OSA and were rezoned to a different zone district.
Is it all right if I highlight your 11.12 section here?
Sure.
Thank you. I'm highlighting City Park. All right, and I missed what you were trying to tell me about these.
Oh, those are just, they're graphic maps showing properties in the last 3 to 4 years that were originally zoned OSA in 2010 and have since been rezoned to a different zone district under this Denver zoning code. So they were taken out of OSA into a different zone district. There's several that have been approved that are clipped together and one that's pending that hasn't been approved yet by council.
All right, thank you. So, Ms. Axelrad, you're familiar with Ordinance 333, series of 2010?
Yes, I am.
May I hand you a copy of that, please?
Sure.
And I have copies for council. This is Deposition Exhibit Number 1. All right. Is that the entire ordinance?
As far as I can tell, yes, it looks complete.
And were you a member of the zoning code task force that led to the passage of this ordinance?
I was staff to the zoning code task force.
All right. Can you explain that, please?
Members of the task force were appointed by the mayor. I was not appointed by the mayor. I was project manager for the zoning code update from approximately mid-2007 through 2010.
And what was the purpose of the zoning code task force?
They were a body that advised the substance and process of the project of updating Denver's zoning code.
And why did the zoning code need to be updated?
It was over 50 years old, since the last time it had been comprehensively overhauled or looked at, and it was out of sync with our adopted land use policies and plans, and needed to be brought up to date and in sync.
And what were the adopted land use plans?
Well, we have numerous. The highest level one was the city's comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2000, and then the city's land use and transportation plan, Blueprint Denver, which was adopted in 2002. And in addition to those, we had a whole host of small area or neighborhood plans or train station plans. And then we looked to the entire city's plans that overlapped with land use and development. So that would include parks, the Department of Parks game plan and other master plans, as well as OEDs, or economic development plans, public works plans. So citywide, all adopted plans and policies that had anything to do or say about land use and development.
So basically, Ordinance 333, series of 2010, the purpose was to pull together all of the previous citywide planning that had been done as far as land use and make it law. True?
No. No, the purpose of Ordinance 333 was to acknowledge the need to update the zoning code, which was the law, and adopt a new code, which was law. The plans were advisory to that effort.
And I see cited here on page 1 the 1989 comprehensive plan. Are you familiar with that document?
Not as much as the 2000.
You are familiar with the 2000 plan?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the integrated land use and transportation plan adopted in 2002?
That would be Blueprint Denver? Yes.
And are there any significant differences between Blueprint Denver and the comprehensive plan?
Yes.
What are they?
Comprehensive plan is a much broader, more general plan that includes policies on economic development, community health, housing, land use. So much broader brush across the whole context of what makes a city, and Blueprint was focused specifically just on land use and transportation and the plans for how the city should grow.
And if we look on page 2 in the third whereas clause there, could you read that out loud, please? Whereas the city council has determined on the basis of evidence and testimony. See that?
Yes, I do. Whereas the City Council has determined on the basis of evidence and testimony presented at the public hearing that the amendment set forth herein is in conformance with the Denver Comprehensive Plan 2000, is justified by change or changing conditions, and is reasonably necessary to the promotion of the public health, safety, and general welfare.
So you were present at the public hearing?
Yes, I was.
Did you testify?
Yes, I did.
And what was your recommendation when you testified?
I presented the recommendation of Community Planning and Development Department, which was to approve the amendment.
So to approve, your recommendation was to approve ordinance 333, Series 2010.
Yes.
Your recommendation was to approve the official map,
Yes.
and your recommendation was to approve the zoning code that was adopted by this ordinance, true?
Yes.
And City Council adopted your recommendation, true?
Yes.
Now, if you could look on page 3 of Exhibit 1, please. Section 59-4, official map. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Could you read the first sentence under paragraph small a?
One long sentence. Okay. The digital maps created and maintained by the Department of Community Planning and Development and published by Technology Services Geographic Information Systems Office, delineating the boundaries of the various zone districts, together with all matters and things shown on such maps, are hereby adopted and approved, incorporated herein and made a part hereof, and collectively shall constitute the official zoning map of the city and county of Denver, hereinafter official map, period.
What does that mean exactly?
It means that there was a map that applied zone districts that were in the text of the code being brought together with the map, and apply them to all land areas in the city of Denver, and that shows you what land is zoned what.
Then could you read the first sentence of paragraph small b, please?
All land located within the city and county of Denver shown on the official map as being zoned to a zone district in the Denver zoning code is hereby rezoned as designated on the official map.
All right, so what is hereby rezoned? What's your understanding of what that means?
All land area prior to this ordinance had a zoning designation on it under the previous code. And with this action, all land area got changed or rezoned to a different zone district under the new Denver zoning code.
All right, and that was all, it says as designated on the official map.
As shown on the official map.
Okay. The term here is designated, true?
That is the term used, yes.
Right, and you understand what designated means?
I would have to look at a dictionary. I have a general understanding of what the word means.
Right, but it's not it's a common term that people use, right?
I think it was used in its common usage
Right.
dictionary term.
And then if we look at page 4 at the top, the Denver zoning code and the official map and this ordinance 333, Series 2010, all became effective June 25, 2010. Is that true?
Correct.
So I wanted to show you now a map showing you Exhibit 2. You have it in front of you?
Yes, I do.
All right. And is Hampton Heights North Park shown on that map?
I don't see any label with that name, so I do not know.
May I show you Exhibit 3? Let me represent to you, this is a map that we pulled off the city's official zoning map on March 1st, 2014. And when you click on a particular location, it pulls up the zoning description, the ordinance, and shows you where it is.
Yes, I see that.
All right. Now, do you see the name Hampton Heights North Park on Exhibit 3?
I do.
And is that same land area shown on Exhibit 2?
It appears to be, Exhibit 2 is a portion of what's shown on Exhibit 3 in terms of the green area.
Right. So, is it correct that Hampton Heights North Park is zoned OSA?
Yes, it is.
Right. And then to find out what OSA means, we look to the zoning code. Is that true?
That's correct.
So let me hand you Exhibit 4. Is Exhibit 4 the section of the zoning code that tells us what OSA means?
Exhibit 4 looks to me to be the purpose statements for the open space districts established by the code, including OSA.
All right, so would you read out loud, please, what OSA means?
I'll read what it says here, which is the purpose of the Open Space Public Parks District. In subparagraph A, it says the OSA district is intended to protect and preserve public parks owned, operated, or leased by the city and managed by the city's Department of Parks and Recreation, DPR, for park purposes.
All right, now if we look back at Exhibits 2 and 3, Hampton Heights Park, North Park, is zoned OSA, true?
That is correct.
And you know that to be land that is owned by the city and county of Denver, true?
I do know that now, yes.
And it was managed at the time by the city's Department of Parks and Recreation, true?
I don't have firsthand knowledge of that.
Right, but you know that to be true from talking to others, don't you?
Calls
That's,
for hearsay objection. Go ahead.
I could only presume by the fact that it's zoned OSA that it had some link in terms of management, ownership, or lease by the Department of Parks and Recreation.
All right, so before coming here today, did you make any investigation to determine if Hampton Heights North Park, which is the subject of this lawsuit, was being managed by the city's Department of Parks and Recreation when the zoning code was adopted in 2010?
Me personally, no.
Did anyone that you know make that investigation?
Yes.
Who?
Our team of planners and GIS and Parks Department employees
Right.
work together to determine which lands should be zoned OSA.
Right, and what did they indicate? Did they indicate that Hampton Heights North Park was, at the time of the adoption of this ordinance, being managed by the Department of Parks and Recreation?
I don't know.
So before coming here today, you made no attempt to find that out?
No.
And you knew you were going to be testifying about the park that's in dispute in this case, true?
True.
So why didn't you bother to find out that critical piece of information?
All I know is it's zoned OSA, so I know at the time in 2010 it was presented to us by Parks that it was either owned, operated, or leased by DPR. I don't know which one it was.
Well, let's just assume, as a hypothetical, because other witnesses are going to testify that this is true, that Hampton Heights North Park was owned by the city and managed by the Department of Parks and Recreation for park purposes on June 25th, 2010. All right? Will you accept that as true?
I will accept your assumption, and answer accordingly.
All right. So if that's all true, then Hampton Heights North Park is a city park under the zoning code, true?
Do you mean the defined term city park
Yes.
as defined in the Denver zoning code?
Yes.
In Article 11?
Yes.
Yes, I will agree.
And the zoning code was adopted by Ordinance 333, Series 2010, right?
Yes.
So the zoning code is part of that ordinance, true?
Yes.
That's all I have for this witness.
I have a couple of follow-up questions, if I may. Ms. Axelrad, at the beginning of your testimony, you indicated that since 2010 and the adoption of the new zoning code, there have been a couple of examples elsewhere in the city of property being rezoned out of the OSA district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In situations where that's occurred, was the rezoning from OSA to another category accompanied by voter approval?
No.
And just for the record, give a couple of examples of what new zoning districts those properties were assigned to, and like the circumstances under which property was changed out of OSA to something different.
One example is near the Children's Museum of Denver in what's labeled Crescent Gates Park along the South Platte River. Portion of land zoned OSA that was included in Crescent Gates Park was rezoned to CMX5, which is a commercial mixed-use zone district, to accommodate expansion of the Children's Museum. In another case, we have in downtown Denver, the May D&F Tower that sits in the middle of Skyline Park was mistakenly zoned OSA and was removed and rezoned in 2011 to the downtown, a downtown zoning district.
Thank you. And in preparation for your testimony today, did you generally familiarize yourself with the issues in this case in terms of what the parties are fighting about?
Yes, I did.
And in the course of doing that, did you learn it's basically a dispute over the applicability of Charter Section 2.4.5, defining when voter approval is necessary for the sale or leasing of parkland?
Yes.
During, how many years was the zoning code task force in place?
They were formed in 2005, so 5 years.
5-year slog.
Yes.
And
Slog wouldn't be the term.
Well, I'm sorry, but it was a long-term thing. And were you staffing the task force the whole way?
No, I entered the game in 2006.
Okay. And from 2006 through to 2010, did you ever, at any of that time, hear discussions in the task force or discussions in front of City Council about whether the effect of the new zoning code and map was going to be to designate parkland within the meaning of 2.4.5?
Objection to this question, it's irrelevant. The ordinance speaks for itself.
No, I did not.
And let me just reiterate that question with a finer point. At the hearing before the City Council, when it was actually being adopted by the legislative body, any discussion whatsoever of the intent of the code being to designate parkland within the meaning of 2.4.5?
There was no such discussion.
Same objection, belatedly.
That's fine. And then just a couple more questions about Exhibit 4 that Mr. Case handed to you. And I think you kind of implied this in your answer. You indicated that Exhibit 4 reflects just the first part of the zoning code language that deals with the OSA district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's an accurate representation of that first part of the ordinance. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. If you continue to flip through the zoning code after this page, and just in general, I'm not asking you necessarily to refer to anything, but
yes,
just in general, what appears in the text of the zoning code to further spell out what the OSA zone district is?
There are critical additional sections specific to the OSA. Probably the next most important is the allowed uses, which is shown in a use table at the end of the same division 9.3, and that shows in the OSA that the only land use, specific use allowed in the OSA is a term of art called city park, which is defined, and we talked about that in Article 11. And then the use table further refers you to another section that says that all land use decisions and development of a city park use is determined by the manager of Parks or Rec or the City Council, depending on what it is.
And that inscription follows down through the use table under OSA for virtually every use listed there?
Yes.
Do you recall if a use listed there is a school, an elementary school?
As part of our standard use table, yes.
And in the use tables in the zoning code, there's an inscription that appears throughout the code, NP. What does NP mean?
That's an abbreviation that we use in the use tables to mean not permitted.
Not permitted.
Mm-hmm.
Does the term NP appear next to schools in the OSA table?
No, it does not.
Instead, it's the inscription you referred to earlier about the prerogative of the manager of parks. Is that an unusual thing in the zoning code to have that kind of thing? And if so, could you explain what led to that in terms of the drafting and the adoption of the code?
It's very unusual. We only have it in one other place, and that's our airport, our city-owned airport lands. That defers to the manager of aviation in the same way. It was intended to allow maximum flexibility of city-owned lands that were managed by DPR or leased by DPR to respond to circumstances as they arise in terms of buildings or uses within the park, a park or land owned by the city, and the amount of development. So in that way, it's unlike other zone districts where that's very prescriptive. This was very much wide open.
And just to wrap up, prior to the adoption of the 2010 code, did we have a specific zone classification in Denver that applied to parks? And talk a little bit about why the decision was made in 2010 to create these OSA, B, and C categories as contrasted with how the zoning was done before 2010.
So prior to 2010, typically what we saw, like in the case of Hensel Park or other parks in the city, it was zoned the same designation as typically the surrounding area. So most of our parks or open areas in residential neighborhoods had residential zoning, like a R1 or R2. And it was an odd fit because those zone districts were intended to allow residential uses of homes of a certain size in Denver, like no more than 2.5 stories or 35 feet, and they had to be set back, and there are all sorts of bulk restrictions. And we had run into instances of very much desired development within the park that kept bumping up into these very restrictive residential zone standards that didn't make sense in the context.
Can you give an example of that? Like what would be an example of a development in a park that bumped up against the old zoning?
So for example, in Denver City Park in central Denver, there's a museum and a zoo. And when the museum wanted to add on to its existing structure, it bumped up against maximum height limits that were intended for homes, residences, but not an institutional building like a museum, which is typically bigger. So we had to sort of do a lot of gymnastics to get variances or to do some creative interpretations, sometimes to find a path to allow a city-desired development in a park. So when it came time to rethink how we zone our parks, we were given that opportunity, since we were rezoning the whole city, to think hard about the weighing of how best to regulate development on lands owned by the city. So in the case of the airport, in the case of the city parks, we agreed that we had other controls that could help inform and provide a process for reviewing development. The zoning can kind of take a back seat and not overly restrict it and just come up with this construct that deferred to either City Council or DPR to use its own processes to review and suggest development in parks.
And so just final question on that. So you mentioned other devices or other ways to control the construction.
Yes.
So in the case of property zoned OSA, and let's say it's a city park property that's zoned OSA, what other controls elsewhere in the city code control construction in parkland?
Right at the same time we adopted the Denver zoning code, and this came out of the discussion of how to weigh zoning versus other tools. The City Council adopted an ordinance that requires all City Council review of any buildings in city-owned land used for park purposes of, I think, 3,000 square feet or greater. So that's a public review and hearing at City Council.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
I have some follow-up questions. Are you saying here under oath today that building an elementary school in a park is a park use?
I'm saying that under the construct of the Denver zoning code and the way it was set up and the way it was intended to work for development, that virtually any use could be conceivable in under the rubric of the city park if the Department of Parks and Recreation manager approves it.
So
So
you-
including a school
So
or a museum or a zoo.
you're saying it would be perfectly fine for the Parks Department to fill the parks with government buildings?
I'm saying that that's allowed under the zoning. I don't know if it would be perfectly fine.
Now then, you mentioned the May DNF Tower had to be rezoned because of a mistake.
Well, that was a privately owned piece of property, not owned by the city,
Right.
that got caught up in our OSA zoning for Skyland Park.
So it was a mistake.
That one was an error.
All right.
The others were not.
Well, the other one that I heard you talk about was the Children's Museum.
Yes.
Is that a city park?
I do not know the exact type of park. It was city-owned land. It was managed by DPR, so there had to be, a process to transfer it to Children's Museum, and part of that process was to rezone it as well.
And when was that land acquired by the city, the land at the Children's Museum?
I do not know.
And you don't know if it was ever designated as a park?
Under some other process, you mean?
Yes.
Other than the zoning code?
Yes.
I do not know.
So let me ask you to look at a couple of other exhibits here. These are exhibits 15 and 16. Can you tell us what these are?
As far as I can tell, because it looks to be a little incomplete, looks like the 1956 zoning map of I think the area that's the subject of the lawsuit.
Right. So prior to the adoption of the new zoning code in 2010, Hamden Heights North Park was zoned R1, according to exhibits 15 and 16. Would that be a true statement?
That looks true to me from this. These are what they
And the
are.
zoning code changed the zoning of Hamden Heights North Park from R1 to R1 and P1, excuse me, because 15 shows
Oh, I see, yeah.
part of Hamden Heights North Park is zoned P1, true?
Yeah, P1 was a parking
Right.
district.
So when they adopted the new zoning code, it changed the classification of that parking lot. It was no longer zoned P1. It was zoned OSA, true?
That is true.
Well, thank you for coming today, Ms. Axelrad. I appreciate your time.
Sure.
The time is approximately 9:38. This concludes the deposition.